Do you ever think about how large your digital footprint really is? These days, everything you do online is being tracked by companies that make money off your personal data. An analysis by Consumer Reports suggests that every person on Facebook is being monitored by thousands of companies. But new laws and tools are starting to make it easier for people to take back their privacy. I'm Jennifer Strong, and this is Shift.
Now here on the steering column is a device called Auto Cruise. You simply set the speed you want.
Self-driving robo-taxis are already on the road in 2 U.S. cities.
As the disc rotates, a mirror reflects the light in the way that depends on how the signal was recorded.
This is the 100 terabyte I present to you Electro, the Moto Man.
Ladies and gentlemen.
I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans.
This episode was recorded in New York City at an event hosted by All Tech is Human, a responsible tech nonprofit, where I'm joined on stage by leading experts on personal privacy.
Hi everyone, my name is Ginny Fahs. I work at Consumer Reports in the Innovation Lab, where I'm a director of product and R&D.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia Angwin. I'm a New York Times contributing opinion writer, longtime investigative journalist, and relevant to this room, wrote a book called Dragnet Nation about privacy almost 10 years ago.
Hi, I'm Tracy Chou. I'm the founder and CEO of Block Party, which builds consumer tools for online safety and privacy.
All right, before we should talk about why people should care about data privacy, I want to ask each of you, why do you care? And how did you come to care?
I started my career working at a small startup that was working in the reproductive health space, gathering fertility data through a slate of different apps. And I was a digital marketer there. So my job was to find people who were considering having children or were otherwise thinking about their fertility and to advertise this great app to them. And through that job, I learned both, one, how easy it was to target people in these very sensitive and private moments of their lives. And then two, I got to see under the hood of how a lot of startups run a little fast and loose with data, and that there aren't many mechanisms or incentives to be really careful about how consumer data is handled. So being in this environment and looking at the immense sensitivity of the data my company was collecting and thinking about what would need to change in the world for us to treat this data differently is what brought me to this work.
I grew up in Silicon Valley, and I thought I would go into tech. I started coding in 5th grade and worked at Hewlett-Packard in my summers. And so I grew up with this idea of software as something in a box that was sold at a store, shrink-wrapped. I don't know if anyone here is old enough to remember that, but it did used to actually be in a box, and it was like $60. It was really expensive. And then I fell in love with journalism and was like, screw tech, I'm going to be a journalist. And then my editors realized I was the only person in the newsroom who understood this whole computer thing, so I started writing about tech. And it was about 2008, I think, when I was writing a book about MySpace, another thing maybe not everyone remembers, but I was writing about it and I thought, it's so interesting, this model, they're not selling software. Like essentially MySpace was software that was free, right? Because it let you build a website about yourself but not have to know how to code. And they were selling access to your data. Essentially, they were allowing advertisers to target you. And as a Wall Street Journal reporter, I thought, this is a new, weird, creepy business model. Like, they're selling data instead of selling the box. And so when I came back from book leave, I pitched my editors on this idea of like, we should do a big series about privacy and that they're selling your data. And they were all like, what? Who's selling our data? That's crazy. They had no idea. And so I began a series of investigative reports on privacy, and it was really early. It was 2010, I think, when our first articles appeared. And I just want to say that I was greeted with derision by the tech industry, who was like, she just doesn't understand, right? And Jeff Jarvis, I'll never forget, said that I was going to destroy the internet. And so every time I see him, I tell him that I'm going to give him 1 minute heads up before the internet goes down.
I came to care about privacy from two different perspectives. The first is looking at the systems and realizing how broken they were, and the other is a more personal perspective. The first came from working as an intern at Facebook in 2008, before they cared at all about privacy. I would hear stories of people messaging their friends in college being like, yo, bro, just like ask her out already. I see you checking out her Facebook profile all the time. I was like, oh, that's a violation of privacy of your friends too. But just the way that Facebook treated data internally, very cavalierly. I think they will deny all of this, but they've definitely buttoned things down. Back then, it did not matter. Everybody had root access to all the databases. Like, it did not matter what you wanted to look at. People would write scripts and notify them if girls were checking out their profiles. As you may guess, the engineering teams were mostly male. I was still a baby software engineer then. I did not understand that this was a thing that people could just do and felt so comfortable doing. So that made me feel a little bit icky and weird, not just like the selling of the data and access to advertising, but just the way that the people who are making technology treated user privacy made me feel a little off. The second perspective, which has made me really care about privacy and motivated my work now with Block Party, is from having been a diversity and inclusion activist, building a little bit of a profile online, and then having the experience that many women who are mildly visible at all online have, which is dealing with the harassers and stalkers and all sorts of weird trolls. I've gotten the parasocial stalkers who imagined that they were in relationships with me and would show up where I was in person physically after flying around the world, which made me very sensitive to location data, where I live, just very, very sensitive to anything geolocation, physical location related. But I've also dealt with the horrible trolls on Reddit and 4chan, where they've launched DDoS attacks on my company, on Block Party. Like, the people who don't like you building anti-harassment software will come harass you for it. So we've dealt with those trolls, and it's just made me worried for my personal safety. I don't think I'm doing anything that horrible, but when the internet trolls go after you and decide they want to launch the mob after you, it is very scary. So that is why I care about privacy and think about it in almost everything I do day to day, like what photos I'm willing to post, what things I'm willing to mention publicly. Never mention any patterns of behavior, where you go running, your favorite coffee shops, anything that can identify where you live, no photos outside your windows, where you live, like all of those things. Like, every day I think about my privacy and this OPSEC.
Now, Julia, you mentioned something when we were talking the last time about when you were working on a book. What was it? It was some years back, about privacy, that you thought you were being a little bit, maybe you were overdoing it, but now you feel like it's so much worse than you even realized.
Yeah, I started writing this book about privacy. I was worried that I was being kind of hysterical or something, right? Because at that point, it was still kind of the Jeff Jarvis world, where it was like, everyone was just like, why are you worried? It's just creepy ads. Like, no big deal. They're just ads. This data isn't going anywhere. It's not being used to give you health insurance rates. It's not being used for anything significant. And I was really concerned that it would be used for all those things, and there were already signs that it was going to be that way. And so I wrote this book and thought, okay, I hope I'm not being too crazy here. And 10 years later, I look back at that book and I was not paranoid enough. Like, literally, I thought facial recognition, for instance, was going to take much longer to be adopted, because at that time it was really bad. And so, I wrote about the threat of it, but I was like, but luckily these computers are really bad at figuring out your face. And so, we're probably going to be fine. And that was just not true. In fact, it's interesting to note that the thing that made facial recognition get good is AI. So what's funny about AI is it's sometimes not clear what it's good at, right? If you use ChatGPT, you might have the experience of why a lot of people think this thing is good. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's really bad. But AI is really good at increasing facial recognition. So from 10 years ago, the error rates in facial recognition were 30%. So 30% incorrect. It's now 0.03%. because of AI. And so we're at this incredible inflection point where the surveillance is so good, right? Even the error rates, and it's true that error rates are still worse for people of color, in particular for women of color, but even so, it's within such a smaller band. And I think one thing that's really important to think about with the AI conversation is that AI is superpowering the surveillance that's already out there. And that is very scary.
Yes. And I feel like something that's poorly understood, if at all, about this is like in the age that we're living in now, your ability to opt out and stay opted out is an AI model is not a database, right? You can't just go in and subtract a line and then it's fine. Also, the ability to be forgotten is predicated on being remembered. Because otherwise, if you opt out of a system and you walk by the camera, the next day you're opted back in, unless there's a copy of your face somewhere to allow people to take you back out again.
Yeah, which is why opt-out is the wrong model.
So why don't we talk about that? Let's talk about some of the ways in which people can begin to take back their privacy. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to, although I also wanted to react to something Julia brought up. I think it's an interesting question. What is the right level of alarm on privacy to express publicly? Like working at a consumer organization, we know that 96% of consumers are concerned about their privacy and security online. But I still think that very far from 96% of consumers are doing much about that other than just being fearful. And I completely agree with you that like there should be more alarm out there, but I also think a lot of people, or certainly more people every day and every year, are becoming more cognizant of these issues. And so then I think it gets to this question of like, what can we equip people with so that when they feel that alarm or that fear, they don't feel powerless? It's one of the reasons why we've put so much investment at Consumer Reports into this product called Permission Slip, which is an easy-to-use tool. It's a mobile app. You can download it and swipe through companies, understand what data companies are collecting about you, and then use your right to opt out, use your right to delete, and just making those rights feel more accessible so that when people are despairing or are having some fear, there is a place to turn. It's not going to solve every problem, but it is a thing that one can do. And I think that that is a way to channel some of this kind of fear that people feel, even if they're not expressing it all the time, into like an action one can take.
And is it just fear? I think it's also overwhelm. And overall, this sense of, well, and I don't like how it's framed either. I think we often put this as technical people will have an easier time versus non-technical people. And it distracts from the fact that this is legitimately hard and it was designed to be hard. It's not really about how technical you are.
I think it also feels like you just can't opt out of most things. Like you go to the airport now and they just scan your face. Like at what point did I tell them they were going to be able to scan my face and let me through? And like, well, I don't know how to get out of this anymore. I think often it just feels like, well, Facebook is going to target ads to me. And like, unless I want to live a life in a cave where I don't touch anything digital, like this is just the world we live in now. So it feels like there's not much you can do.
I just want to say you can opt out at the airport. I do it every time on the, and they hate you for it, but I'm that person. And so I highly recommend, because one of the things here is that we don't have a lot of agency, right? And so I think that although these moves of me opting out and making the gate agent's life difficult, which I do feel bad for that person because it's not their fault, but I think it's our one way of voting, right? Because we don't have politicians who are running on privacy, or at least I haven't seen anyone running on that issue. So we don't have a lot of opportunities as citizens to express our interest in this topic. And so I think participating in opt-outs and deleting your data and all that is, A, it's somewhat helpful. It's not fully helpful. But B, it's a way of voting, I think.
Absolutely. And on this point of participation, like if people use the new privacy laws that are increasingly existing, that becomes evidence for why there need to be more privacy laws, why there might need to be a federal privacy law, for example. So I completely agree that finding the ways to participate ends up being the argument for the continued evolution of policy, of tools, of more investment going here generally.
Right, because the companies always say, oh, no one cares. Nobody adjusts their privacy settings, so therefore we can make an argument to government that no one cares. And so I think we have to show that we do care.
Yeah, I think that is something interesting about the tools, right? The sense of a collective voice in a way versus just each person for their own. And perhaps, as you were just saying, having a group of people gives a little evidence to those with more power than we have as individuals to make change.
I want to speak a little bit more about the tools as well. And Ginny was already starting to talk about this with permission slip, making it easy for you to opt out and exercise your rights. There is a greater space of these privacy tools now. Privacy Party, that Block Party builds is another one of these, where we're really trying to make it easy for people to participate in these actions, to assert their rights and change the defaults. A lot of the platform companies are not going to make it easy for you. And so then they subtly use that difficulty in the user experience as an excuse for people don't care about this because they make it impossible for you to do anything. Of course, people aren't going to do it if it takes 30 minutes to find the setting buried in Facebook that will actually hide away the things that you want to hide away. Using these tools is also a way of voting, participating in the building of these tools and advocating for them. The other thing about the tools that's really fascinating is that they can be the evidence that the privacy laws work, and laws are coming into effect where you can't actually exercise the rights really until somebody builds an app like permission slip. So California had a privacy law that made it so you should be able to exercise your rights, but like what consumer knows how to exercise this right? And when people are building tools, like Consumer Reports is building permission slip, it makes it possible to see what the instantiation of these laws is in technology so people can actually use them.
Well, and another lever for influence too is like getting the company to invest more in their privacy program and their privacy tooling. So the privacy parties of the world that show you how to use the privacy settings that exist on a lot of the websites that have the most data about us and the most sensitive data about us, then becomes a case to that organization that these tools are getting used. These tools need to exist, they need to be refined. Similarly for permission slip, where we're sending data requests to companies every day, we find that companies get on the phone with us, shocked at how many data privacy requests they're receiving, and asking us how they can be better at processing them, how they can be more efficient at executing on these privacy requests they're receiving. And that too ends up kind of removing friction that these teams are facing internally in their organizations to make privacy more of a priority.
I don't want to say we're being negative because we're not, but is there something here that is making you hopeful? Is there something you want to share that makes you feel like this will get better? Because I do think that probably all four of us genuinely believe there is a future where this is better.
I mean, this room is full, and that's really exciting. When I first started talking about this a long time ago, it was just like me and 3 people. So that is wonderful. And I do feel like also one thing that I think is true is that the younger generation is much smarter about privacy. I know that my kids who are teenagers are super smart about it. They do most of their stuff in disappearing messages. They use Instagram basically as a billboard, like only things that you would actually want the entire public to have. They have multiple rings of friendship on the, so I think that they are smarter than my generation, certainly smarter than my parents. So I think people are getting better at it, but that is an unfair thing because we shouldn't have to become experts at it. There should be a baseline of your data won't be used for all these, let's make a list of 10 terrible things, and that should be just off the table. And unfortunately, we're not at that point. Sorry, that wasn't positive.
I think I'm heartened by the regulation that is starting to come into effect. Europe is moving much faster than the US on this, obviously. But the fact that Europe is passing things like GDPR was a number of years ago, but DSA and DMA, there's a lot more regulation in this space, and the regulation reflects general population sentiment as well. Like they wouldn't be pushing these things through if people didn't care. Like that is hopeful to me that there's more literacy around what data privacy means, what data rights are, these different concepts that people maybe didn't understand before around interoperability and portability of data. Many more people now know and are pushing for them, and we're starting to see that reflected in regulation. Hopefully we'll see that in the US soon. There's starting to be more privacy laws, at least introduced at the state level. There's some discussion at federal level. Hopefully there will be a little bit more success in getting things through soon.
Yeah, I would certainly second that. When I joined Consumer Reports, there were 2 states that had privacy laws, and now there are over a dozen. And I've been in this role for about 3 years. So it's like a pretty nice pace of new privacy laws being adopted. I would say the other thing that makes me optimistic is that consumers are using these rights en masse. When we announced permission slip, within the first week of the app being publicly available, we had sent 1 million data rights requests to companies. And so Thank you. Yeah, I mean, to me, that is evidence of the pent-up demand for these rights, and that as soon as these rights become more legible, more convenient for people to exercise, that there is going to be a groundswell of interest and action.
I found something hopeful to say, which is that privacy does appear to be one of the only bipartisan issues and is overwhelmingly popular with the public, right? When California had their ballot initiative, it won by a landslide. And so I do think there is actually this groundswell that is growing, and lawmakers are responding somewhat inadequately, but I think hopefully we'll get there.
And we're going to need to leave it there because we're out of time. Thank you, ladies, very much. And thank you to all of you for being here. This episode was produced by me and Emma Silikans and mixed by Garrett Lang, with original music from him and Jacob Gorski. Thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Strong.